The Celts. These guys were so creative. One of the biggest what ifs from ancient history for me is what would native Celtic coin design have looked like if they just had a little bit more time to urbanize and let their own unique artistic style for coins develop? Around the middle of the 1st century BC, we start seeing some of the first truly unique Celtic coin designs appearing, but that's around the same time the last Celts were being conquered. Think about Julius Caesar conquering the Gauls, the Romans from the late Republic conquering Celtiberia, or late in the 1st century AD, the Romans, once more, conquering the island of Britain. After these conquests, the coin series of the native Celts suddenly stop, indicating the Romans imposed their own monetary system, effectively snuffing out the Celtic monetary tradition before it could properly blossom into something so unique that it could be called entirely Celtic rather than an imitation of other types. And I know that the term Celts is incredibly broad, but all different flavors of Celtic peoples seem to have had some artistic similarities between them. And if you have had the chance to see examples of Celtic artifacts in a museum, you might have noticed they had this wonderful artistic style with organic looking patterns. A mix of circles, bends, nothing is stiff. It's all about curves. Their jewelry looks fantastic, especially the torques they used on their necks. The fibulas they held in their coats are also amazing, and even their weapons and shields are highly decorated. The thing is that the Celts had a much smaller part of their population living in cities, and this reduced the demand for money, as in coined money. A larger part of their transactions was made probably with barter or maybe the use of commodity money. So that was precious and non-precious metals. These were some of the commodities used, but not necessarily in coin form, with standard weights or alloys. Proper coins, often imported from the Mediterranean peoples, ended up being concentrated in the small part of the population that handled longer distance trade, or the elites that could afford the goods brought from this long distance trade. The story between Celts and coins begins around the 4th century BC. Philip II of Macedon and his son Alexander the Great, they both noticed how good the Celts were as warriors, and they often hired entire armies of Celts to fight for them. Of course, the Greeks were highly monetized, so they paid these mercenaries with coins. And with the return of these mercenaries to their homes after the campaign, they brought a large number of coins with them, in much larger numbers than what was acquired just by trade. And this led to coins going down a few ladders in the social strata. Now, not only the elites and important merchants handled coins, but the warrior class and smaller merchants and artisans could also access these coins with trade. And this introduction of more coins in Celtic societies led to a certain mentality shift that happened when coins entered the scene. People learned to read the look of the coin more than the metal weight. A familiar image meant value, and that recognition became synonymous with money. And once the imagery on that piece of metal became associated with money, soon there was more demand for more coins, more pieces of metal with these drawings that meant money. You know what I mean? That's when local artisans stepped in, issuing look-alike pieces to keep commerce flowing. And here's where things took a curious turn. The original Greek message on the coins became unimportant. Who cared if Alexander was the king of all Greeks? Maybe the Greeks did, but the Celts in the middle of Europe certainly did not. What mattered was the visual pattern that people trusted, the picture on the piece of the metal that told people, this works in trade. And today's video is brought to you by L5, the new ancient coin marketplace. L5 is a platform developed by coin collectors for coin collectors. It offers the lowest transaction fees on the market, from 5% down to 0. No listing fees or undisclosed reserve prices. And you can choose between buying and selling coins through its auctions or its fixed price lists. The most important idea behind L5 is generating an environment of trust between people. You can buy, you can sell, you can do both if you want to, all within a system of transparency and accountability between its users and the platform. Apart from a lifetime guarantee of authenticity in case any coin sold on L5 turns out to be a counterfeit, the platform works with a group of renowned experts on different fields of ancient numismatics and a body of expert moderators, with the objective of creating an environment of high trust where every single coin is reviewed by more than one person and curated by an input from the community. I think their concept of collaborative accountability, low fees, and transparency is a revolution to the ancient coin market, and I can't recommend the L5 enough. Give them a look. I personally think this is a wonderful concept that the ancient coin market was in need for. Visit l5.com. And any kind of copying slowly introduces visual drift. A die engraver traces a model he only partly understands, the next engraver traces that tracing, and soon the Greek letters become corrupted here and there until everything dissolves in a simple ornament. A portrait becomes simplified, not because of a lack of skill, let's remember these guys were great artisans, but simply because the engraver is engraving a face there. He doesn't know that this face is supposed to be, for example, Heracles. He doesn't know the myth. And this loss of information was filled with their own native Celtic way of making art. You see those typical Celtic forms of art. Spiral, swirls, wonderful curves. They start seeping in these areas where the engraver doesn't know what to put on the design. And the final results are, well, sometimes chaotic. Sometimes the result of decades of copying is just an abstract form. And in other occasions, it just looks funny. So why don't we look at some examples? The Triformer collection has once again joined us, bringing these wonderful Celtic imitations we're about to see. So let's begin with the first major Greek influence on Celtic coins, Philip II of Macedon. For this experiment, we're going to look at the originals, and then we're jumping to the Celtic imitations, and these will have different levels of abstraction. What we have here now is a breathtaking tetradrachma issued under Philip between 340 and 336 BC. That's the original one. Macedon at this time was a bit of an outcast in the larger Hellenic sphere. They were considered barbarians, and one of the many moves on Philip's part to show they were indeed purebred Greeks was to conduct a monetary reform, which made Macedonian money more in line with the weight standards used by important Greek cities. And he also produced these wonderful coins in fine style. Just look at this wonderful bust of Zeus with his laurel crown in extremely high relief. He wanted to impress whoever handled these coins to see oh, we need to take the Macedonians seriously. Heading to the reverse, we have another show of the Macedonians advertising them being indeed Greek. Philip's horse riders participated in the Olympic Games, and he won in multiple occasions, so he celebrated this achievement on his coins, showing his prized horses on them. So here we have a young athlete riding this very muscular horse. He holds a palm branch, a symbol of victory for the Greeks, so it could be an even more direct representation of his victory on the games. And below the horse, there's a little kantaros. This was a type of vase. A pair of modern eyes would have thought this was maybe a trophy because it looks a lot like a modern trophy. Maybe this would reinforce the message even more. And at the very top of everything, we have an inscription, Filippo, something like made under Philip or of Philip, showing under whose authority this coin was made under. Spectacular, drop-dead gorgeous coin. And here we have a Celtic copy. This one is typically attributed to the region of Pannonia. That's roughly the area around eastern Austria, western Hungary today. So geographically, the Celts who issued this coin were actually not that far away from Macedon. So they must have seen the originals relatively often through trade and by working as mercenaries. This particular coin is dated to the 2nd century BC. So here we can see what a couple of centuries of making copies of copies can do to a design. And you know what? Let me tell you, it's 200 years. So in the overall spectrum of Celtic art, this coin actually retained a lot of the original style. We can see that the bust of Zeus is still perfectly recognizable. The bust on his face, his cheekbone, the overall roundness of his head is still depicted very accurately. Maybe his face and particularly his eyes became a little bit wonky, but it's a very charming coin. And I like how the laurel crown became like perfectly straight and the leaves are arranged in this neat pattern, so it cuts the whole design in two. It's interesting in the viewpoint of the art itself. It's a very sharp visual element on a design that should have been more fluid. It should have blended more with his head instead of breaking the image so much. And looking at the reverse, now we see the engravers did some funny stuff here. First of all, the horse is practically intact. Its head has been simplified a little bit. I particularly love how the entire shape of the head has been reduced to a single wiggly line, which loosely resembles a horseshoe, and it actually does a pretty good job at representing the overall contour of the head. The proportions of the horse's body are very well represented. Notice this. I mean, the Celts bred horses. Horses were a part of their daily lives. Therefore, 2 centuries of die engravers had no problem representing the image of a horse because they were used to horses. However, what was definitely not a part of their daily lives was the Greek language. Remember the Greek legends at the top of the design claiming the coin was issued under Philip of Macedon? These ended up devolving into a series of abstract symbols. So here we have a clear example of something that was not a part of their daily lives, meaning they just copied the letters the best way they could without knowing the meaning of what they were doing. And this, over centuries, degenerated the design. There's also the curiosity that the horse rider seems to have lost his legs and has morphed himself into the horse. See? There are no legs here. It's like a centaur. I mean, such a cool coin. Like, just enough abstraction to make it look interesting, but not enough that you can't recognize it based on the original. Such a nice coin. Next, I wanted to show you a Celtic imitation in an early state of abstraction. For this example, let's use the tetradrachma issued under Alexander the Great as a prototype. So first, let's look at the original one. This is a very nice piece issued between 323 and 317 BC in the city of Tarsus. So we're looking at an early posthumous piece. Nothing out of the ordinary if you're used to the type, if you're familiar with it. We have in the obverse the bust of the demigod Heracles wearing the skin of the Nemean lion. And in this particular coin, we see some lovely flocks of hair coming out of the skin, like from under the skin. And the lion's mane is also very fluid in this example. And on the reverse, the typical image of Zeus, the king of the gods, sitting on his throne, holding a scepter, representing his power, and a small eagle. The eagle was his symbolic animal, and he has like an outstretched hand where he holds the bird. To his right, we have an inscription, very normal, Alexandro, meaning of Alexander, and around the fields there are a series of mint marks to identify the coin issue. So in this case we have a small monogram under the throne and a small goddess Nike holding a laurel crown to the left of the design. Now let's have a look at a version of this coin issued probably somewhere around Central Europe by the Celts that lived there. This one is attributed to around the end of the 4th century, beginning of the 3rd century BC, so right around the time that the previous original official, let's say, issue was made. So you can see this is a very early imitation, made probably, a couple of decades after the original prototype. So this must have been either like a 1st generation copy or a 2nd generation copy at most. And we can see on the obverse that the engraver did a pretty fantastic job. The portrait actually, you know what? I've seen a few of these coins, and this one actually looks better than some of the official mints in my opinion. Not the original example that I showed, but it's better than a few coins I've seen. The whole face of Heracles is pretty well made. The hair looks nice. The lion's mane is made with an equal level of detail and there's like variation, you know? We can see the engraver wasn't lazy when making the mane. Every flock of hair faces a different direction, so there was some effort put into making this copy. The face is also pretty well made. Maybe if I could criticize something, the nose looks a little bit pointy, so that might help denounce this coin as an imitation, but the coin overall is very high relief and it was very well made. Now, the reverse is where things get truly interesting, and we can see that phenomena of the engravers not understanding certain parts of the design well because the Greek culture was not part of the cultural context that the Celts were accustomed to. So, first, the letters. To the right, there was supposed to be the word Filippo written. That's for Philip III, Alexander's half-brother and his immediate successor. In this particular case, it has been perfectly copied. The engraver might not have understood what the letters and the full word meant, but he did the perfect job. The coin is perfectly readable in Greek. However, as we go to the inscription at the bottom, the word Basileus, king, making reference to Philip, here's where we start seeing corruption seeping in. The first letter, beta, to the left, has become two separate elements. Then we have the alpha, which has lost its horizontal dash, making it look like a lambda. Then we have sigma, iota, and we have a proper lambda. These three letters are properly made. And finally, there was supposed to be three final letters, epsilon, omega, and sigma. Hopefully the drawings I'm putting on the screen now will help you visualize it. Because in this case, the three letters have degenerated into a symmetrical shape. The omega is inserted into a couple of square brackets. These brackets loosely represent the letters that were supposed to be here, but it's definitely incorrect. So this area shows that without a doubt, the engraver who made this die, although he was a good engraver, did not understand Greek. But I mean, he still did a pretty solid job. The design at the center, the seated Zeus, is represented quite well. Maybe Zeus looks a little bit malnourished here compared to the buff Zeus that is often found in the original pieces, and this skinny body ends up making his head looks relatively big, but it's a perfectly acceptable representation of the god. The throne he's sitting in, the scepter and the eagle, even the three monograms around the fields have been copied with a very high degree of fidelity. So, let's keep going. Now that we have established that Celts were capable of making good copies, let's see a funny example of when they did a bad job, because frankly, I love this one, it's quite funny. Here we have a type of tetradrachma that was struck at the cities of Maroneia and Tassos, both in Thrace, mostly in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. At this time, the region was in this state of flux between these two cities. They were trying to break free from Macedonian rule. The Macedonians, on the other hand, were fighting with the Romans. And then the Romans allied with these two cities against Macedon. Both factions were hiring Celtic mercenaries to bolster their forces. And it seems like everyone just started issuing these types of coins. That means this type was made by the two cities that originally made them. Maybe the Romans were issuing these locally as well to pay for troops, and even the Celts, who got hired as mercenaries, were also making copies of these back home. That's why these coins are so common. And what you have here is an example from Maroneia. This is an original one. On the obverse, we have this very elegant portrait of the god of the wine, Dionysus, with his hair nicely decorated with a crown made out of grape leaves and little berries, and you have these nice braids coming all the way to the back of his head. Heading to the reverse, we have a full body image of Dionysus, fully nude, holding a couple of spears and a bundle of grapes. The version of Tassos had an image of Heracles here instead, but both coins are quite similar. In both cases, the legends make reference to the left and right to their respective deities being the saviors of the city, so in this case, Dionysos Southros, Dionysus the savior, and at the bottom, the two types mark who made this coin. So in this case, it reads from the Maronites. And then we get to our imitation. This copy is attributed to the Celts living in the lower Danube region. So once again, not very far away from where the originals were made. It shows an average level of abstraction. The main features are all still here. The face, the braid of hair starting around the area of the ear and going to the back of Dionysus' head, the leaves on his hair, but as you can see, it's all getting a little bit fuzzy. I'll show you in just a second how this portrait later on became really crazy, but in this example it's still reasonably recognizable. However, when we go to the reverse now, they really seem to have missed the mark. The image of Heracles is still recognizable, at least the shape of a man, although that's pretty much what they communicated here, because it doesn't seem to have been any effort to communicate this was Heracles. Once again, the engravers probably had no idea who this demigod was. The objects he held on the right and left hands have degenerated into a series of palettes, so the engraver just added some kind of visual element here to indicate that there was an object here, and the legends have devolved into a series of dots, circles, and squares. I mean, we can get that these symbols are meant to represent letters, specifically considering that the originals had very blocky characters, but we can see the parallels between one and the other, and that this design has degenerated to a point that you can't read anything. Some of the very latest imitations of this type were issued as late as the 30s BC, so almost at the time the Roman Empire was founded. And I just wanted to share a couple with you because, come on, that's hilarious. On the reverse, in this one, Heracles has lost his legs. It's basically a stick figure with a torso, 2 super long arms, an oval-shaped head, and little palettes all over the design meant to probably represent the legends. After probably a dozen of copying iterations, they just degenerated into this mess that we have here. And if you look on the left on your screen, that's where the obverse is. And I mean, that's just fantastic. I mean, the design elements are once again still here. Since we know what the original coin looked like, you can identify the face, the eyes, the leaves and berries at the top of his head, the thick braid, it's all here, but the abstraction has reached a level that I think Dionysus has become more like a pufferfish. I mean, look at that little triangular shape at the left. It looks like a tiny little tail fan. And the bulgy portrait makes him look like a pufferfish when it's angry. I mean, just look at it. And now, this one is even more abstract. It's not the case that it has reached peak abstraction and we can't recognize anything from the original. The main elements are surprisingly still here, but all have been reduced to simply like geometric, loose representations of the original, rather than an attempt to replicate it. The leaves and berries at the top of Dionysus' head have become a few triangular shapes and dots. The braids have become something that looks more like a horn rather than anything else. The face has become a square with some disjointed elements inside. You can see an eye mixed in there. And finally, at the bottom, the neck has become 2 lines. These 2 lines actually look more like little legs on the horn over it. It just looks so weird. But for this piece, the reverse is my favorite. I mean, it's actually better than the previous coin. We once again have a fully formed human body, rather than one without its legs, and this super long arm in the shape of a long blade that makes it look like this character is coming straight out of a horror movie. But what I like the most about it, it's Heracles' legs. I mean, these are like super long legs in proportion to the torso and the head, and it makes it look like one of those nerdy characters that have their pants pulled all the way up, nearly up to their chest. I mean, it's just so good. The scary looking arm and the goofy long pants, it's really a piece of art, this thing. And I mean, the original intent of this video was to come to the defense of the Celts and their artistic prowess, but as I kept writing the script and looking at the coins, I need to admit it, even a little bit, they made some pretty funny coins. So what do you think? Would you collect Celtic coins? Do you consider their abstract imitations a show of their own self-expression, or maybe the sign of an inferior civilization? There are no wrong answers here. Let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave a like and consider subscribing if you did. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon. Let me give a special thank you to all of my amazing channel members and Patreons for their generous support. This channel would not be the same without your help. And if you would like to be part of this list, have early access to my videos when they are uploaded to YouTube, and a series of other perks, make sure to check out my Patreon page and my members tab on YouTube. Thank you very much.